Let me stretch out, warm up. Go, champ. Oh dear. Right. Sorry, I'll try and be more enthusiastic. Enthusiastic intro.
Start the video with.
Oh, for fuck's sake. We're back again. Oh, Jesus. Hello, everyone. That was like the start of the news. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just Run With It at 11 minutes past 2.
I've got 12 over here, bro. I don't know.
Well,
11, actually. Yeah, you're all good.
I'm living in the past, what could I say? So this is one of the episodes of our Rumdamentals series, 4.
Episode 4, correct.
Yeah. Winning. I know precisely what we're doing. We're on the ball. And today we are going to be talking about barrel aging. Aging in general. Probably mostly with barrels. And this kind of follows on from our previous couple of podcasts about distillation and a couple of different methods of distillation. So kind of as a kind of starting point, we've got our sort of completely unaged, straight off or still, whichever method it may be, rum, essentially. And now we are going to make it taste even better, hopefully, by sticking it in a barrel for a little bit, is the plan.
Solid intro. Good job. Good job. So, yeah, as Andy mentioned, basically all the episodes we've done prior to this one have been the kind of lead up to the point we're at now. So we had to select and ferment our raw ingredients. We then had to distill it in some way to bump up the ABV. So all that kind of provided the foundation. And now at this point, we're looking to basically add like some complexity and some additional elements to make it a well-rounded, finalized product. Aging, again, like all the other topics we've touched on, there's like 1,000,001 different rabbit holes we could jump down and things we could discuss. Some things are a bit more controversial than others. There's certainly in the modern age a lot of experimentation going on, aging in different vessels, aging in different regions around the world and stuff like that. I think, again, we'll kind of just sort of touch on the general premise of it, like the kind of the theory behind aging itself, what it's actually doing to our distilled product and effects it's having on the, on the final taste. And I'm sure we'll touch a little bit on kind of different methodologies, if you will, or things that are favoured by different parts of favoured in different parts of the world and things like that. I get always the best thing to do is if you really do have any questions more in depth or specifics, just drop us a comment or a message or whatever, let us know. And it's something that we'll touch upon, I'm sure, in the future when we take a more in-depth look at, brand specifics.
Right. So the reason why we kind of started aging rum in the first place was basically because a lot of it was coming over in this sort of slave triangle type thing involving sugar as well, between sort of Africa, Caribbean and the UK. So a lot of this rum would be transported back from the Caribbean to the UK in barrels, and kind of people cottoned on to the fact that it seemed to taste better after being sat in a barrel on a ship for, a couple of months or however long it took to get back over the Atlantic. So this is kind of where the whole idea of barrel aging really kind of stems from when it comes to rum. Certainly started to make a difference then and kind of went from there really and snowballed, and people realised the longer you leave it in the barrel, sometimes it will taste even better. So a lot of these barrels as well, kind of in terms of Caribbean producers anyway, will be made from American oak. So they'll usually be old bourbon barrels. And basically that's a couple of reasons. So one is one of the laws surrounding making bourbon in America is that you have to use they call it like a virgin oak barrel. So it has to be a completely fresh, never had anything in it before American oak barrel. So they tend to have all these bourbon producers Woodford, Jim Beam, Buffalo Trace. I ran out of bourbon producers then, all things.
They use a lot of JD as well. JD's a prevalent one.
Yeah. So basically, all these people, all these producers in America, these American whiskey producers will have loads of leftover barrels that they don't really have a use for anymore because the law states that they can't use them again. So kind of purely geographically, it kind of makes sense to send them not too far on a ship to the Caribbean and kind of sell them to rum producers. So a lot of rum producers will buy these kind of ex-bourbon barrels. I mean, they get used all over the world these days, but kind of sort of in the past, this kind of relationship started just through kind of purely geographical and this sort of law. So you find a lot of stuff will be finished in ex-bourbon barrels, which kind of does have a little impact on the flavour, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Jack, do you want to talk a little bit kind of more in depth as to why we actually age things? Like, what's the reason behind it?
Leave me with the heavy stuff.
Yes.
Well, I guess there's a lot of different reasons, right? The primary one is when a spirit comes kind of fresh off the still, a lot of producers are going to kind of want to leave it to rest for a little bit in order to basically develop. I never really know a way of wording it without it sounding negative, because kind of terms like harshness and adding complexity, it makes it sound like something isn't going to be pleasant in the way it's not much. But producers will obviously sit these products in the barrels, and over the course of time, due to a number of reasons that we'll get to in a second, I'm trying to think of that. I really can't think of a very positive way of describing it. Do you know what I mean?
It kind of mellows everything out, and it kind of takes that slight edge, I suppose, off something that is going to be very new in terms of a spirit. If it's not been aged at all, it is going to be kind of a bit more rough and ready, and kind of this whole aging process just seems to take that really harsh edge off it. Certainly, you're not going to, these sort of more sort of complicated conages and these flavor molecules and stuff, they actually basically grow over time in a barrel for a couple of reasons. So one of which is evaporation. So if kind of all these rum producers in these very warm climates are kind of unfortunately losing a lot of rum a year, I imagine, if they've got a fair few barrels, which most of them do. So we're talking anywhere between sort of 7.5%, 8% to 10% of your barrel every year just gets lost through evaporation. So kind of what is, these barrels obviously aren't completely airtight, so stuff can get in and out, hence the loss of rum. So what that'll do is kind of concentrate all these flavors as well. As well as that, you're kind of going to get some stuff coming through from the wood itself. So a prime example is, as we were talking about, American oak. It has this flavor ester in there called vanillin, which is obviously the same flavor as vanilla. So that's kind of where a lot of these rums are going to get these vanilla notes from, if they're not adding it themselves, which we'll get onto in the next podcast. Is actually from these American oak having vanillin in it, which is going to interact with the rum and kind of impart these flavors. Another thing is these kind of esters and conages and these flavor molecules, stuff like that. they actually start to change over time due to oxidization. So some of them will actually develop into different flavors over time. So, you know, some of your more fresh fruit flavors are going to change slightly into kind of, it goes from a bit more sort of green apple sort of flavor into these kind of like more citrus, more like tropical fruit. So you're looking at this way, you start getting these like really deep, interesting flavors. You start to get these sort of like tobacco notes and things like that starting to come through in your rum. Like leather is another one as well that you'll find in stuff that's been aged for like a very, very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to kind of touch on that we've not really discussed yet is kind of like with most stuff we've described with rum up to this point, there's a lot of different preferences depending on where you are in the world, and as well as preferences, there's actually a lot of laws, rules and regulations depending on where you are. There are certain places in the world where, like we've discussed before, they're pushing for what we call GIs, or geographical indicators. Often within these rules and regulations, what is included is practices behind aging methodology and post-distillation practices. So something that's interesting to note is like a comparison, Scotch whiskey. So Scotch whiskey around the world, for some reason, it's just universally accepted at this point that all the rules that were kind of initially formed around making Scotch, they are like that around the world. Everyone has to stick by it. It can't be called a Scotch unless it follows X, Y, and Z rules. Rum is a little bit different because it's produced in so many different places. There is so much variety as to what people are doing post distillation, including what they're choosing to do with the aging processes. There are certain people pushing within their GIs that are asking for at least a minimum amount of aging in a particular place that it's made. So, for example, Barbados, there's a lot of people right now pushing that it has to be aged for at least a couple of years in Barbados before the barrels are shipped off anywhere else to continue aging. That is quite important for a variety of reasons. The environment itself really does impact on the processes that Andy was just talking about. It really depends on how much evaporation is taking place, how much oxidization is taking place. And as a result, will totally depend on the outcome of the final product. Scotch, by law, it has to be aged in oak barrels and aged for a minimum of 3 years, and it has all been aged in Scotland. So it is that one set climate. So there is that consistency there that kind of runs throughout. Rum is coming from all over the world, so depending on where it's from, it's going to be vastly, vastly different. Typically, in a warm climate, in like a Caribbean climate, on average, the general rule of thumb is that a product will age about 3 times quicker. So this rate of evaporation, Andy touched upon, about 8 to 10% of this angel's share, 8 to 10% of the volume of a barrel every year. If you're losing that, it's probably going to be 3 times as less than the Scotch. But on the flip side, the more positive is that this process is kind of happening quite a lot quicker. So this kind of mellowing, this additional complexity and the kind of like maturity of these congeners and esters and stuff is likely going to happen a lot quicker. So if you're imagining this barrel that's sat there throughout the day when it's warm, it's expanding a lot. Then at night when it cools down, it contracts. It's sucking in all the liquid that's inside that barrel. So it's actually like sinking into the wood. It's taking on all those flavors, all the kind of ex-bourbon notes or whatever product was in there prior. It's taking all those characteristics. Then again, sun comes back up, it expands, spitting that back out, and it's rinse and repeat on that process for a prolonged period of time. So it's interesting because I think traditionally a lot of people kind of, the connotations of age are always a staple of how high quality the product's going to be. So most of the time in whiskey, if you've got a 12-year-old Scotch and an 18-year-old Scotch, chances are the 18 is going to have a lot more complexity to it and is going to be higher quality. But as a general rule of thumb, rum is completely different. It really does depend on your palate and what kind of style you're looking for and what you're going for as to what products you should pick. And that is why when it comes to likes of age statements on bottles and the way things are marketed, there's been a lot of controversy and back and forth over the years.
So just to kind of expand on that as well a little bit more. It's kind of another thing it's kind of like a big difference in between these sort of like warmer climates and cooler climates. Is kind of the loss of alcohol and water. So that's going to have an impact on your kind of final product anyway. So if you're aging somewhere that's very hot, very dry, the air's going to want more water rather than the alcohol out of your barrel. So sometimes like bourbon, again, is a prime example for this. Their actual alcoholic content will actually go up because it's aged in such a dry climate. So the air actually wants the water rather than the alcohol. Whereas somewhere in Scotland, where it's kind of, pissing down for half the year, their ABV actually goes down because the air's got enough moisture in it, so it wants to take that alcohol out instead. Again, that's obviously going to impact our kind of concentration of flavour and stuff like that. So it's going to have quite a big impact. What else was I going to mention? Another thing you'll find a lot of producers are doing at the moment is actually taking off age statements.
So kind of what you were touching on there is the idea of like a uniformity throughout the category as a whole. Again, touching on Scotch whisky as an example, given that all of it comes from one relatively small area, it's kind of unanimously agreed upon that an age statement that features on any Scotch product has to, by law, be the youngest age mark in that blend that's featured in the bottle. Rum is very different. There are some countries that play by those same rules that I just outlined, but there are many others that think that you can include the oldest age in the blend as, the age statement that's on the bottle. A whole variety of different things. And so a lot of producers now are deciding to basically just scrap the idea of including age at all in order to avoid confusion. And it's all part of this movement of, transparency aligned with this kind of premiumization that's going on. There are a lot more products that are coming out now that do have older rums in the blends, but they don't want to promote it in a disingenuous kind of way. So coming up with kind of like different funky names and stuff like that is the kind of way around, that confusion.
So as Jack was saying, technically there's nothing apart from these places with these geographical indicators. There's nothing to stop someone putting sort of 1% of their batch of rum will be, a 20-year-old rum, say, and the rest of it may be 2 years old. And there is actually nothing wrong with someone writing 20 years old on the bottle. It's really that lack of transparency that people are really trying to get rid of at the moment. So a couple of places where you won't find that is certainly anything coming out of Jamaica. Jamaica, Barbados and Guyana probably. I think Guyana is certainly all the same distillery, so unless someone else buys some rum off them and kind of does it like that, anything from actually the Demerara distillers, I believe, will be a minimum age statement. Certainly anywhere from Jamaica, I'm pretty sure it's in the GI that it says it has to be a thingy, but then again, it doesn't stop them selling it from someone else, and someone else kind of skewing the numbers a little bit, I suppose.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was just going to say. Yeah. Even within the realms of what you would consider to be pretty kind of airtight laws, because so much rum is getting done in bulk and getting sent to different places around the world to be used within other products. Again, it gets a little bit hazy as to what's actually acceptable and what's not. And it's the same idea that I think we spoke about in a prior podcast at some point. The idea of just using a country of origin on your label. There's a lot of dispute as to when that is acceptable, because there are certain producers that really feel that just using the country of origin in itself is a mark of quality. And the idea is that some of these like mass producing these companies that are mass producing and the quality might not be quite as good, as kind of like riding on the coattails of some of these very historically embedded, good quality, high reputation producers, and they're kind of like almost tarnishing their name. So it all gets very, very fuzzy.
Yeah. So kind of while we're on this, it's probably a good time to explain the Solera system, really, which is another way of aging. I believe it comes from like sherry or port.
It has that kind of vibe, just in even the name,
Yeah.
isn't it? Like,
yeah, I believe it is a very it's like a kind of Spanish way of aging things, basically. So that's why you'll find like a lot of these places that are kind of do these like sort of Spanish style rums will have like sort of a Solera kind of aging process. So prime example is like Ronda I believe all their stuff's Solera, or certainly a vast majority of it is. I'm pretty sure. I think Santa Teresa maybe as well. Kind of a lot of these sort of Spanish kind of countries where they produce rum. It's kind of 9 times out of 10, I would say, or maybe 8 out of 10 will be kind of the Solera based aging system. So kind of if you imagine a sort of triangle of barrels like this. So basically what they do is put the youngest rum in the top of these barrels, and then what we'll do is take the oldest stuff out of the bottom. So every time you take some stuff out of the bottom, you're basically refilling it from the top, and then if you take out from the bottom layer again, you kind of everything just shuffles down a layer. It's probably not very well explained, but that's kind of the basics behind it.
Yeah, I think it's important to note as well is that a lot of these people, a lot of these producers, I should say, they're not necessarily trying to hide the fact that they use this methodology. There are actually some that are quite proud of the way in which they do it, and they think that that in itself is it's a very legitimate and difficult process to master. It's like, again, Ronda is a prime example. The Ronda 23 is probably what would be considered as their flagship rum from Guatemala. And it says in big writing, 20, it says 23 and it says Solera on the bottle. Some people argue, however, that those that are not quite as in touch kind of in the spirits industry and what that means, they will just see the big red 23 and that will be their guideline as to the kind of quality of the product. And there are certain people that regard that as disingenuous when that's then thrown in there with lots of kind of like romantic language and descriptions and stuff that doesn't necessarily really mean anything or make much sense. It's just kind of like a marketing thing. Other producers start to think that it's a little bit disingenuous, and they might be kind of using all of these other things to mask the fact the product's maybe not quite as good quality, or certainly not as much time and effort, and that maturity hasn't taken place. It's maybe been pushed forward by artificial means or other methods.
Yeah, but speaking about that rum sort of specifically, I'm sure I have seen somewhere someone did like a sort of chemical analysis on it, and from the kind of the levels of like all these different esters and conages and stuff in there, they kind of reckon that the average of it is only probably about 6 years old, in fact, like 5 to 6. So
right,
that's the it's a lot. There's going to be a lot younger rum in there than some 23. I'm not arguing the fact that there might be some 23-year-old rum in there, but it certainly doesn't make up the majority of what's in there. But then you compare that to something like, El Dorado 25, for example, that is like a minimum of 25 years. You're going to have some stuff in there that's probably 26, 27, maybe. And it's about 5 times more expensive because a lot more like time and effort has gone into it, And again,
and I just kind of like what I was saying at the start. It's nice that rum is a category where age isn't necessarily a mark of quality. Like, you just threw out some numbers there, and you said that the average is 5 to 6 years. I've had plenty of rums that are 5 to 6 years old. They're great. I've had some rums that are 20 plus years old and they're not that great. It's more just this idea that for the average Joe who's maybe like new to the category and wants to try something that's slightly more premium, they'll see that big red 23 and they don't realize that actually, one, it's just not a very accurate indicator, nor is it just a good guideline anyway as to what you should be looking for. And this idea then feeds into other elements. Again, certain countries will predominantly have certain styles. I feel like looking at country to country is definitely a more accurate an accurate indicator as to what sort of style you're going to be getting from the bottle. But if people are jumping on the bandwagon and using Barbados or Jamaica or Guyana or anywhere around the world, you name it, the people that are kind of tarnishing that name, and there's a lot of diluting the market there and stuff. It just gets very, very difficult for a consumer to differentiate and find what they're truly looking for. I can't remember who it was, but it was very early on when I first started learning about rum and doing tasting sessions and stuff, and they said that everyone is a rum drinker. You just have to find the rum that's right for you. And I think that is totally true. But certainly the way that the market could tip, it would make it very difficult for people to find exactly what they're actually looking for without other people fighting the good fight and kind of wanting to put some rules and regulations into place.
Yeah, certainly. I'm trying to think if we need to do anything else. Oh, we can talk about finishing stuff in different weird barrels. That's fun.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well, because even though this was technically discussing aging, and we've not actually talked too much about the aging process itself. Yeah. Some of the oldest rums that you've had, like, what's your verdict on them, and what are some of the oldest rums out there available on the market that you've seen?
So obviously we kind of spoke about this before, but obviously the Appleton 50 is probably the oldest that is kind of, I don't even know if any still available. I couldn't tell you. It's been out for a few years now. And I know there's very limited amounts made. But that is kind of, for me, that is a bit too much. It takes on too much of this sort of like woody element to it. So as well, when we're talking about aging, something that we haven't brought up yet is kind of most of the time it is actually where the colour of the rum comes from, is basically the tannins in the wood. So same as you get in red wine or tea when you don't put enough milk in it and it kind of dries your mouth out. Those are all tannins, so it's all the same thing. These tannins are kind of going to give our rum that sort of kind of nice tea, almost like tea colour, depending on how long you age it for and in what barrels and stuff as well you age it through. So these are also going to impact the flavour. It's going to give it that nice sort of balance of a little bit of dryness that kind of entices you to drink some more, I suppose. That's my excuse anyway. And it's also going to, affect flavour and things like that. And something like the Appleton 50 is a prime example, I think, for me personally, of that going a bit too far that way. It is very tannic and very dry. I mean, if you can afford that to drink some, I suppose you're into some stuff that probably is kind of a lot older. So, you might be into drinking some 80-year-old cognac or something, which they, age very well. But certainly a 50-year-old rum, I think, is a bit too much for me. I much prefer something like a 21-year Appleton, or even the Joy Blend is way better for me personally.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm trying to think.
That's a mix of 25, 35-year-olds, right?
Yeah.
I think that's that.
That's certainly, but even then, that's I wouldn't necessarily say someone that's just getting into rum should go immediately and spend £200 on that bottle, because you're probably not going to appreciate it. I don't think, because it is kind of is very full on, and like the flavor is very concentrated flavor. You know, if you think about, well, a prime example is, it doesn't necessarily always work like this, but if you lose 10% of your barrel a year, say you start off with 100 litres, after 7 years you're going to have 49 litres left, if you lose 10% every year. They kind of minimise this by kind of topping barrels up from the barrels and stuff like that, but that's kind of, imagine after like sort of 50 years you've lost a lot of a rum, so that flavour is like super concentrated, and it's just a bit much for me. I'm trying to think if there's anything like really old other than that. There's Appleton 30 that's really nice.
There's a 50-year El Dorado, but that is, it's a mix of like 33 year to 50 year. I think part of
like
it is
50th anniversary of the...
yeah, exactly. So I don't think it's strictly a bang 50 year plus rum. But a lot of the other El Dorado rums from Guyana, I guess it's kind of somewhat of an important one to touch on when thinking about premium kind of sipping rums and age statements and aging and whatnot. So, as you said, DDL, Diamond Distillers Limited, basically the layout, the structure in Guyana over the previous few hundred years was there was typically a lot of smaller plantations, and then on these plantations, these sugar plantations, would typically be at least a small still operating on there as well. As you know,
I think there was 308 at one point.
Is that true?
Was the most, yeah.
That's crazy.
308 stories.
Yeah. So fortunately, over time, of course, the slave trade kind of dwindled altogether. So throughout that time, these smaller plantations and distilleries kind of ended up like merging into one, and now it's basically all under the umbrella of this DDL. So it's basically like a hybrid of all the past kind of distillation methods and technology and infrastructure that all these other plantations and whatnot have kind of like, you know, merged together. So it features some there's some very old stills in there, and yeah, it's just steeped in history. But Guyana is one of these places where age statements, it has to be the minimum age in the blend is put on the bottle. And in 1990, when I think was it 1990? I think it was the early 90s. Either way, was when the first bottle came out from DDL under the name El Dorado, and it was their 15-year rum. And that is one of the first products that kind of gained traction in the sipping world of rum, if you will. It's, for anyone that's had it before, it's sort of like on the sweeter side, isn't it? And it's a nice entry level. A lot of people say it has a number of parallels to whiskey and stuff, so that is a nice way to kind of get people through the door. I've kind of forgotten what my point was from bringing up El Dorado, to be honest. I think it was just the idea of the age statements, I suppose. They are still a very prominent rum, you know, in the category, that are featuring the age bang in big letters on the and they are certainly quality products. In a lot of cases, they do actually add a little bit of sugar after the fact, which is something, a post distillation, you know, choice that we'll touch on in another video, but won't worry about that here too much. But yeah, it's interesting to see how different countries go about it in such different ways. You know, I don't really know where else to go with that point. It's just, it's weird to see how differently people market the products and what kind of choices they make and why. I personally quite like the idea that in a lot of instances they're moving away from it, because, as I alluded to previously, I really do think that it means a very different thing, the age of rum, to the age of, say, a Scotch. And certainly in the UK, historically, you know, we're used to seeing Scotch. We're used to the idea of kind of, that age being an indicator of the quality, and it being that age, that legitimate, you know, age. I think personally, a lot of people aren't even aware that, you know, say 15-year-old Scotch is often going to be a blend of lots of different ages, 15 being the youngest. I quite honestly think a lot of people that aren't really into spirits too much think that it's just, you know, a whiskey that was made, put in a barrel for 15 years, and then put into a bottle, and that's it. You know, no
one's.
additional
They don't
practices.
think anyone's kind of like, you know, spent the time and effort to select all of these barrels and mix them together to make something that tastes like the 15-year that you would have tried like 3 years ago. You know, and that is going back to this kind of. I was going to say, going back to sort of people taking these age statements off bottles. This is like a prime example of that. You know, you can get stuff. People are starting to blend stuff now that is going to be true to that thing. So one of the prime examples I always use is like Mount Gay Eclipse. So that recipe's been around since like 1905 or something. And
I think it's 1910.
Well, there you go. All right, I'll shut up then.
Old either way. And they must be doing something right if they never tweaked it. So, you know.
Well, yeah, but, you know, the reason why there's not an age statement on that is because there might be some 2-year in there, but then there might be some 5-year in there, you know, and then 1 year, the 2-year might not be quite ready, or, you know, it might have been put in a slightly breezy area of the warehouse, so it's not aged quite as they thought it might. So then they might have to change it, so there might be some more like 3-year in there, or there might not be any 5-year in there 1 year, it might be some 4-year, or, you know, it's kind of, it's all about that sort of balance, and that's why these master distillers are so clever, and like these master blenders are so clever, whereas they can, never mind the distillation part of things, that it's amazing. It's kind of, it is having this knowledge of all these barrels that you've got aging and tasting them all, and in their head they're going, right, I need to put all these together to make something that tastes the same as the product did, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And like, that's like the true sort of brilliance of the whole aging thing. You know, it's going to be different every time. You know, the wood in the barrels, the staves in the barrels might be, you know, the knots in them, or, you know, the actual grain of the wood might be slightly looser 1 year. So, you know, you're going to get the rum going into the barrel a little bit more. So if it's doing that over and over again, day after day, it's going to age faster, and it's going to make stuff taste different. You know, no 2 barrels are going to be the same. No 2 barrels of rum after a couple of years are going to be the same. That's kind of what the people, I think, like you said, don't really understand, like how much actual effort goes into sort of making these things taste the same. If anything, it's very impressive. And that's why you start getting
just getting consistent.
Yeah.
So no, it's certainly a fascinating process. So no, I was just going to say, so we've obviously, like, we've talked about using bourbon barrels. What about other vessels for aging in when it comes to rum, and how will that impact on the flavour?
Oh.
So like I'm interviewing you, don't I?
Yeah, I like it. So it kind of, it obviously depends what other barrel you're going to use. So a couple of examples, you probably see quite a lot of. Plantation is a prime example of someone. They're obviously a French company that have their own Maison Ferrand as well, which makes cognac. So they have access to a lot of French oak barrels rather than American oak. So a lot of their products, stuff like Plantation XO and some of the other sort of weirder expressions that they do, like the yearly ones and things like that, they'll actually go, they'll ship the rum back to France, and it'll do a secondary aging in French oak. So French oak tends to be a little bit less vanilla heavy. Obviously, you're going to get some of that residual cognac sort of flavour that's left in there, which is a little bit more fruity anyway. So you're going to get like that nice sort of like dried, like raisins and stuff like that, like dried fruit. You're going to get a little bit more of that out of French cask. And then they tend to be a little bit more like, it'd be like toast flavours almost. which sounds a bit odd, but it's like pastry, sort of this Maillard reaction that also happens in barrels as well. So basically, when you're aging things, all the insides of the barrels are charred, and there's like different char levels are going to have a different kind of effect on the flavour of your rum. So basically, like the heaviest char is called like crocodile char because it kind of looks like the crocodile's back on the inside of the barrel, and that is obviously what that's doing is kind of first of all breaking down the wood, so it makes it a little bit easier for the spirit to get in and out of the wood, and it also caramelizes some of the sugar in the wood as well, which is going to give you this sort of bit more interesting flavour, a bit more like caramelly sort of tones and things like that. And then you can also, if you go into like that level of char, you're going to get like toffee and like almost like sort of bonfire nighty kind of Halloweeny sort of flavours, you know, all that sort of almost like burnt sugar, toffee, or all the good stuff.
Yeah.
And then lighter chars are obviously going to give you different things as well. And then kind of as well as French oak, there's a lot of people that will do like sherry cask finishes. So that's kind of, again, it's going to go to a lot sweeter. It's going to be a lot of like residual sugar left in that wood from the sherry anyway. So that's going to give you a lot more fruity flavors, things like that. Same with like something like port or what's the word?
Madeira?
Yes, that's the one. Thanks.
Yeah.
It escaped my mind there. So like port, Madeira, sherry, they're all going to have a very similar effect. So it's going to sweeten up a little bit, but then you're going to get that kind of underlying fruitiness coming through anyway from like grapes and stuff that have kind of gone into that process. So that again, it's just adding that layer of kind of complexity, and you don't even have to leave things in those barrels for very long at all. 3 months, it's going to make a difference. 6 months, it's going to make a big difference.
And it depends, I guess, on what kind of balance they want to achieve. Do they just want like subtle notes of these kind of fruity flavors, or these like you touched on before, these kind of like wintry or like bonfire nighty flavors, or do they want that to be at the forefront? Me personally, I think my preference is that I always like the kind of like raw elements of a rum to shine through, and any of these additionals, I want it to almost be like a side note,
little added bonus.
Yeah. So like sherry's a prime example. Sherry's, I mean, I like sherry anyway, and I certainly like rum that's been like finished in sherry casks, and that like sweetness and that kind of like rich fruitiness definitely adds like an extra dimension that is great. However, there are certain rums out there where that sherry flavour is almost at the forefront, and it feels far too thick and sticky and sweet, and it almost just overpowers what I'm sure is a really good, almost like the baseline raw foundation are there. It's kind of like they're almost like ruined by the additional, it's kind of how I feel about adding a lot of additives and flavouring to rum. Often it's there to sort of like mimic complexity or mimic sweetness or whatever, and it actually ends up making a rum taste like it's lower quality. If something's been naturally aged, there's just a difference there, isn't there? There's a difference. I think that you could get a rum that was fairly mature and add loads of stuff to it to kind of like really amplify and elevate those mature sort of vibes, and it actually ends up making it seem way more artificial and less high quality, So I think it's the same when it comes to the likes of adding different.
That's next podcast, don't worry.
Yeah. It's like quite a nice segue, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, I think what's the difference? Because it's something that confused me certainly for a while. What do you think is a good way of describing the difference between like aging in different casks or barrels and just finishing? So if someone says like, oh, it's a rum that's been finished in sherry, or it's a rum that's been aged in sherry casks, like how would you describe?
I would say, I think if something's finished in something, it's a lot shorter period of time. So if something's aged in a different barrel, it's going to be a case of it's going to spend the majority of its time aging in that barrel. You know, if something's finished off in something, you know, you're probably looking at less than a year, probably. And 9 times out of 10, what they'll do if you want to completely age something in a different barrel, they'll tend to use barrels. They call them like spent barrels, or like they'll be nearly spent. So that means they've been used a couple of times before, probably. Kind of a lot of these nice things that we want that are inside the wood itself have kind of been used up. You know, it's on its last legs, basically. So what that's going to do is it's not going to be overpowering that sort of amount of flavor if you want to stick something in there for a long period of time. You know, I say long period of time, any longer than sort of like a year to like 6 months to a year. If you put, you know, a second, like a first fill after the fact port cask, say, that's literally, it's had port in it, they've emptied the port out, and then you put your rum in it and put it in there for like 5 years, it's probably not going to taste very good. It's going to be completely overpowered by port. You know, so they tend to use like a lot like older barrels that have seen some things, a bit like us too, been through the wars. So it's not going to kind of impart that over the top amount of flavour in there, but it's still going to be there. And I'd say like cask finish things, like I said, tend to be a very short period of time, kind of like in and out. And usually it'll be like, you know, like we've mentioned, but you can also use, you know, we've got some rum in work that is finished with Islay whiskey casks. That's really interesting. It gives that sort of smoky edge to it, but I think that's only 6 months, like in and out job. I've got some rum here actually that is kind of finished. It spends a couple of years in French oak and then a year in Irish whiskey casks, or 6 months in Irish whiskey casks, I think. You know, there's and again, that's just adding layers of complexity, which is fair enough. There's, what else have I seen? We've got cachaça in work that is actually aged in 3 different types of wood. So that's from Brazil. And that's aged in barrels that are made from 2 native species of tree from Brazil, and in American oak as well. And then they blend all 3 together, and that is delicious. It's Jaguar. Yeah, it's amazing. Try it. It's like the best cachaça I've ever tried, I think. It's wonderful. I'm trying to think of other weird things that you can age stuff in. Some people I've seen use like cherry oak and cherry wood and things like that, but some gin. Herno do a gin.
I guess the general trend is that. No, I was just interested. Finish your thought.
Yeah, Herno actually make like a little barrel.
I'm not sure if I know about this Herno gin.
That's finished in actual juniper wood casks, which is quite interesting, for like 6 months or so. Yeah. It's delicious as well. Really good. But anyway, that's gin. Ignore that.
Yeah, no, I guess the general trend is that people are getting more and more experimental just because the availability is there. You know, it's so much easier to import and export materials than it. Well, I mean, not in the last few months, but up until recently, you know, it's never been as easy to transport all this stuff and kind of have a little bit of a play around with it and see what's what. And I just think that, like, American oak, it's one of those things where it's not necessarily going to be around forever, is it? You know, it's in such high demand, and I mean the volumes of bourbon that are getting produced every year, it's to say that each time, you know, it's got to be a fresh barrel. They're not cheap, and you know, we don't just have infinite resources. So the idea that people now are preemptively toying around with a lot of different materials and vessels to age these things in, it's produces some interesting results. And rum, as we've known it, might stay this way. You know, like how weird would it be if in the future getting a rum that was aged in American oak. Imagine if that was like weird. That was like a rarity.
Rare.
Could happen potentially.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Speaking of American oak right now, you're probably looking at getting about 4 barrels out of a tree that is the best part of 100 years old. To put it into perspective, as like how that's why barrels are not cheap. They're probably, for like a 200-litre barrel, you're probably looking at least £300. And then some of the kind of rarer, I know something like a Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. They're in quite high demand for like finishing stuff off in, so they could be anywhere up to like £800, £1,000 for a used barrel. How depressing is that? I mean, it makes great rum, but it's madness. That's why
when you do go to, I was just going to say, when you do go to places, if you do go to distilleries or warehouses, places where people are blending rum and things like that, the amount of barrels that they have it's pretty crazy.
It's scary.
It's a lot of money.
I went to a winery in Rioja, and they had like £10 million just in barrels, like that had wine in. So they were just sat there. I got lost, like in the cellar, because it all just looks the same.
A maze.
Yeah, it's just barrels everywhere. So I got very lost. It's a nightmare. Good though, great wine.
My heart bleeds for you, getting lost in a massive wine cellar in Rioja.
I wouldn't go thirsty, I suppose.
Well, I think. Yeah, true. I think that just about covers the bases we wanted to cover in this episode, right?
Yeah.
I think it maybe went on a bit longer than we did it with.
Yeah, that's fine.
But there's just so much to cover, isn't there, when it comes to aging? It really is.
Yeah. Is it me or you?
It's you today, I think. I gave the spiel last time. Right. I'm just going to say this every time.
I know, yeah.
You do it.
I forget these things. Absolute snake. Yes, once again, if you're watching this, like I said, should be watching it on YouTube. In that case, give us a subscribe, like the video, leave any comments you want to leave, anything you want to ask, etc. If you want to just send us like love notes or tell us we look handsome, we'll also take those, I think, at this point. If you want to tell us to get rid of our beards because we look scruffy, don't post that.
It's not happening.
No. If you want to tell me to get a haircut, I 100% agree with you.
If you want to start a crowdfund to get Andy's haircut, yeah, he's in dire need at the moment.
Yeah. Other than that, if you want to follow us on Instagram, it is just Run With It, all one word. No underscores or anything stupid like that. We're very simple folk. We've got some stuff going on. We might have some exciting news potentially about a guest soon, which would be fun. So we'll probably have a great laugh with the person in question if they want to do it. What else is there? That's about it, right?
I think that's about it for now, yeah.
Yeah, give us a follow on Instagram. We'll say hi, probably.
Yeah. Nailed it. Good job.
Yeah. And we'll see you all next time.
See you next time.
Sticking stuff in rum and what else are we doing? Filtration and some other
We'll
bits.
do filtration, colouring.
Yeah.
Additives, I reckon.
All the good stuff. Right. Adios.
You sound thrilled.